And there's a lot going on tonight. Strap in.
The Dan York State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
I'm glad that we have a guy as informed as Timothy Edgar from the Watson Institute here tonight to talk about the latest out of Washington. We actually invited him in on the Comey situation and some of this cyber worry across America because he's got expertise in both kinds of things. And between the time that we asked him to come in and today, we have the Russian intel flap. And I think flap is probably an understatement here, no doubt about it. Welcome in. Nice to have you aboard. I want to touch base on a couple of things. As we record the program, don't tell anybody, but we record this program early in the afternoon, and a 2:30 press conference was scheduled by the Paw Sox ownership for a new package for a stadium that they're going to now call something at Slater Mill, which I think is interesting. And reportedly, they've kind of learned the lesson here and are putting up a significant amount of equity. I don't have those details as we speak. You may have seen it already on the news. We will definitely touch base on that tomorrow on the radio on WPRO. Also, we'll make sure that we have some informed content here on the television show, both tomorrow night and through the rest of the week. All right, let's go to the rundown and check on what's happening here. I mean, that's the word that I came up with here. The headline for Luisa Ponte, who refuses to resign despite the embezzlement charges, you know, everything that the fraud, whatever, that is surrounding his campaign finance, more than sloppiness, no doubt. No confidence votes, don't bother him. Here was Eyewitness News coverage of the case, so to speak.
A refusal to resign following an overwhelming vote of no confidence.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Monday's special meeting of the Providence City Council was brief, but held value. The outcome, a 12-1 vote of no confidence in Council President Luisa Ponte.
I understand my colleagues succumbing to political pressure. I get that. I hope that we can continue to work together and work on behalf of all the citizens of the city of Providence.
The Democrat was indicted last Wednesday after a lengthy investigation by state police. He faces 1 count of unlawful appropriation, 1 count of embezzlement, and 2 misdemeanor counts of misuse of campaign funds. Before Monday's meeting, he made his case in front of his supporters, constituents of Ward 10, which he has served since 1999.
I've never been one to take the easier, more expedient path, and that does not end today.
But just moments later, his colleagues called for the end of his council career.
He should step down as city council president for the betterment of our capital city.
Councilwoman Carmen Castillo abstained from Monday's vote. She tells us she isn't meddling in this decision and that this situation is one the city can learn from.
When you have a team, you are together. Something happened to one person in this team, you have to support it. So now something happened to him and nobody supported.
The supporters of Luis Ponte were wearing shirts. It's a South Side thing you don't understand in both English and Spanish. This ward and this section of the city have a big difference of perspective on the way things ought to be versus the rest of the world for all sorts of reasons, some of which are legitimate complaint, others which are just a disenfranchisement. And, you know, the minority politics where the elected official makes sure that everybody feels like they're victims and they're the only ones that can help them from their victimhood is in play here. It's a disgrace that Luisa Ponte doesn't know that he needs to step away from a leadership position in the city of Providence right now, because the big picture is that the city of Providence has a city council president who's been indicted. And you know what? I know, you know, Buddy Cianci, God rest his soul, established that he would fight it to the very end, but you'd think that we'd learn some things about the city's reputation and the fragility of our economy and reputation. Obviously, no. All politics is local, and he's hiding behind that right now. Well, more as we go over the course of the week. In the meantime, there's a new player in the statewide federal political environment. Here's the Providence Journal's headline today. Representative Nardolillo is in the game. He's running against Sheldon Whitehouse. This is the longest of shots. He spoke at his announcement last night.
My friends, some candidates only outline problems. They can go on and on with an endless list of broken features of our government. Now, there are issues that I feel strongly about that need addressing. Taxes, jobs, Veterans Affairs, and national security are the ones that are most important to me.
Okay, is that the Yankee pinstripes, or what is that? Now, he's pretty well known for his flamboyant dress. Whatever, you know. I ain't no fashion guy myself. Coming here pretty loose. What are you laughing at? Lexi wants me to wear a jacket on this show, and I refuse to do so. I refuse. You give me a new set, maybe I'll get a new jacket. That could be coming. But look, you know what? The guy doesn't have a pot to in politically. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, everyone's got a right to run. You know, we'll have him here. And, you know, we've had him here before, and we'll talk with him about the issues. But I got a better chance of shooting 65 at the U.S. Open than he does winning this race. What?
That'd be pretty good.
That'd be pretty good.
Yeah.
I'd like to shoot 85 right now. My short game is in the dumper, and it ain't going to be at the U.S. Open. I just want a $2 Nassau victory somewhere. Anyway, listen, we'll be kind to Representative Nordalillo, support people who are running, but he's not the blue chip Republican that's going to give Sheldon Whitehouse any kind of difficulty here. All right, let's get to the big conversation, which is like what? Headline. This is the Washington Post story, and here's the description of what's happened in the last 24 hours.
President Trump took to Twitter to push back against reports that he shared classified information with the Russians in this Oval Office meeting last week. Mr. Trump said he had a right to share facts about terrorism and airline safety and did so for humanitarian reasons and to get Russia to step up its fight against ISIS. The Washington Post reported Mr. Trump discussed classified information that came from a U.S. partner that was so sensitive it had not been shared with U.S. allies and was even restricted in the U.S. government. National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster was in the room. He said the story, as reported, is false.
At no time were intelligence sources or methods discussed.
Now, the president can disclose classified information, but the concern is that Mr. Trump may have revealed significant details compromising a sensitive intelligence channel. Greg Miller is the co-author of the Washington Post story.
If this was all appropriate and there was no problem here, why was it that White House officials were quickly calling the CIA director and the NSA director to give them a heads up on what had just happened?
Lawmakers want to know what was said.
If this report is indeed true, it would mean that the president may have badly damaged our national security, nothing less.
Senator Chuck Schumer is calling on the White House to make the transcript of the meeting available to the Congressional Intelligence Committees immediately.
Timothy Edgar joins us. He's no stranger to the program. I guess I could do the old, what do you think of this? So
right.
Why don't I do the old, what do you think of this?
Well, it's just another extraordinary revelation of incompetence and stupidity on the part of President Trump. I wish I would like to say something nicer, but I just can't. When you reveal that kind of information to the Russian ambassador and the Russian foreign minister, well, of course he has a right to do it. He's the president. He can declassify any intelligence he wants to right on the spot. But if he's going to be doing that, it's going to damage a partnership that we have with apparently one of our most important partners in the Middle East. And I was surprised, actually, that General McMaster made the defense that he did. I mean, he knows better than to make this distinction between highly classified information and sources and methods.
So let's follow the bouncing ball here. The Washington Post story comes out. The NSA director goes running to the microphones yesterday. The president tweets out more or less another, it's almost like the Comey thing revisited. The White House tries to establish some kind of discussion, analysis, spin. The president comes in behind and more or less knocks it all back by saying, yeah, I did it. And what I did was legitimate. The Comey firing, which we'll talk about next segment, in this particular thing, it was legitimate. Then today, McMaster kind of reformats what he was trying to say. And now Lexi at the record time for the show just tells me the New York Times has put out that Israel is the partner, which I think is another conversation about where the press plays in this whole thing. Reportedly, the press has had this information in the pipeline for quite some time and has been advised that it was so powerful and such a security risk that they've kind of kept the lid on it themselves. So now it seems like the balloon has popped and everything will be reported on this. I don't know what the average person watching the show, and I consider myself to be one, makes of all this.
We have very sensitive partnerships with a number of foreign countries. Those governments trust our intelligence agencies and our president to be careful with the information they share with us. If they don't trust us with that information, they may cut off that intelligence. And we depend on that for our national security. Our intelligence agencies don't act alone. They rely on sources and information that other countries bring us.
All right, when we come back, we'll break this down a little bit further. There is the Commander-in-Chief. Stay with us. Oh, I have to tell you, in the meantime, before we do that, I just want to remind you that if you are looking for some sophistication in your banking world right on your smartphone, then the Card Valet program is the perfect option for you. You can check your balances, you can transfer money, let me cheat on my notes, you can set limits on spending, you can use Apple Pay or Samsung Pay. You can do a bunch of things. Go to navigantcu.org and learn about what Card Valet can do for you and enjoy life's journey, as I do with Navigant. Be right back.
The president and his staff haven't been on the same page this week.
Oh, I was going to fire regardless of recommendation.
Mr. Trump's statement directly contradicted his own staff, including the vice president, who all claimed the president was following the recommendation of Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein.
He's making fools of his own staff. The White House appears to be in chaos.
The president tweeted in response to the contradicting reports, saying perfect accuracy is not possible, and maybe he should just cancel all press briefings and issue written responses instead for the sake of accuracy.
Now that's days ago. That was the Comey flap and all of that. First of all, you should understand, Timothy Edgar has worked on both sides of the aisle via administration. You are a cybersecurity expert. You get all this intel stuff, so you're just not some guy I'm pulling from Brown who's teaching a class and doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. You are immersed in this industry. It must be like an unreal experience to see the tradition. I mean, this is not draining the swamp of this is well-established protocol for the nation's security that seems to be upended here on a couple of different fronts, correct?
Absolutely, and whatever you think about Jim Comey, whether you agree with him or you disagree with him, everybody in Washington, everybody in the country, I think, respects him as a public servant. And not only the firing itself, I mean, the way the firing was handled really just, it was very disrespectful to the director of the FBI to do that to him. And now we have the President of the United States on the record in front of NBC saying that he did so thinking about the Russia investigation. And it just cries out for a special counsel. It cries out for a special, what we call the special prosecutors now called a special counsel. And it made me think a little bit about your earlier story about some of the problems that Providence and Rhode Island have had with corrupt public officials who are under investigation, and the need for an independent review of an elected official, whether that's the President of the United States, somebody on the City Council, or the Mayor of Providence. It's the same thing.
Yeah, I wish it was as, I mean, all due respect to Providence government, it's certainly not national security at risk here. And,
well, stakes are certainly higher.
Oh my gosh, in a big way. So now, what do you think is the essence of, let's go back to the most contemporary story first. What do you think is the essence of the worry for the American citizen about what has happened here? What essentially do you think President Trump has screwed up here?
Well, the FBI was investigating whether Russian intelligence officials were coordinating with officials of the Trump campaign.
And I'm talking about the latest saga, and then we can move back into the Russian intel.
But let me get to that.
Okay,
and to have the director of the FBI fired in the middle of that investigation just raises serious questions about the independence of the FBI. It raises questions about how seriously we treat our national security. The Russians are going to do this again. They're doing it right now in Europe. They're going to be doing it to us again in other elections.
Well, the two stories connect. The story about the Russian, about the intelligence shared with the Russians, and this obviously because on the day after, or the day after the Comey termination, the Russians are in the House. They're literally in the House. And it's the report the Washington Post put up, which began our show tonight, and which is the subject of coverage all across America, stems from those meetings that Donald Trump, talked to them about in some kind of reportedly braggadocious fashion about, what he's now learning and understanding about what ISIS is trying to pull off. And he is suggesting, in his tweets that, well, listen, Russia needs to be tougher on ISIS too. So it's kind of like on that level, we're partners. We may have some brawling going on a whole bunch of other things. Is there any legitimacy to the notion that the Russians need to share in some of this intel, and that the reaction by the press and the media pundits right now is way out of line?
Essentially, no. The Russians and the United States have very different interests in Syria. Yes, of course, on one level, we all are in the struggle against terrorism together. But when you look at Syria, the United States is supporting rebels that are fighting Assad, but also fighting ISIS. And Russia's primary interest is propping up Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, not in fighting ISIS. So you don't want to be sharing intelligence information with another foreign power who's essentially hostile to your interests in Syria. It's just incredibly naive. It shows a tremendous naivete towards the Russian government.
Do you think this is a liability for our assets, in the field, not just American spies, but those who are cooperating? And if what the New York Times reportedly spit out here when we began taping the show today are Israeli partners, do you think that lives are in danger right now?
I don't know that we can go that far, but I do think that I was surprised, like I said, about General McMaster saying that he didn't compromise sources and methods. I really think he should know better than that. The reason that we classify information that's shared with us by foreign countries is because if you know what that information is, you're going to damage that partnership. You're going to potentially uncover who is the source of that information. So maybe he didn't describe the source to Lavrov or to Kislyak, the Russian officials in that meeting.
But it's traceable.
But it might be. At least it makes the risk
the press
higher.
seems to be tracing it right now.
Absolutely.
So talk to me about that, Tim. What is your perspective on now what the press's role is here? Reportedly, it was a cooperative national security bent interest on the part of the press. Yet when the Washington Post spits out that clearly the intel community and the White House had to be in the sourcing of the Washington Post story. There's got to be somebody who's very intimately involved, who's highly discomforted by what Donald Trump did. Now, what does the press do? Continue to try to hedge bets against an irresponsible president? Or just go ahead and let the floodgates of reporting go and report out the entire dynamic of this intel saga?
This is another reason why it's dangerous to have so much infighting in the administration. I mean, typically, the national security agencies will go to the press sometimes and say, work with us here, keep some of these details out of the story if there's a leak, for example. But if you've got an administration that seems to be at war with itself, where the president is telling the Russians something, other parts of the national security establishment are outraged that he did that, it's very difficult for the CIA or other agencies to make the case to the press that they really need to be circumspect. They need to have a united front. You can't just go to the Washington Post and say, don't publish this, if one part of the government is saying do it and the other part is saying don't.
So now the president's trying to make this about leaks. That the moral of the story is that we have leaks, as opposed to the moral of the story is that he acted out of protocol. Which one do you think will win and resonate with the American people?
Well, I think that people tend to hear these stories based on their own preconceived political leanings, unfortunately. So I don't know the answer to that. All I can say is if he wants to stop leaks, he needs to create a sense of trust between himself and the national security team, to the idea that they're all on the same team. He shouldn't be, even if he did want to share that information, even if there was a legitimate reason to do so, you need to prepare ahead of time. You need to talk to your intelligence community to make sure that everybody's on the same page.
Ronald Reagan outed the Russians way back when on some intel, the Soviets at that point. But his protocols were well thought out, strategic. It wasn't like, burp or tweets.
It's a very dangerous situation to have the president and the intelligence community not on the same page. And that's the fundamental way you're going to stop the problem of leaking. You're not going to stop it by trying to hunt down leakers. The idea that you can stop leaks by finding out who the leakers are and punishing them has been proven wrong time and time again, going all the way back to Richard Nixon.
All right, so the question I think everyone's starting to ask themselves is, how long are we going to put up with this? And we also should check in on this world challenge on cybersecurity. Stay with us.
And as I mentioned already, we don't say what's classified, what's not classified. What I will tell you again is that what the president shared was wholly appropriate. The story combined what was leaked with other information, and then insinuated about sources and methods. So I wanted to make clear to everybody that the president in no way compromised any sources or methods in the course of this conversation.
Which is something that he said last night as well. Is he fingers and toes crossed, or do you think he buys into this, at least aggressive defense of his boss?
Well, I think he has to. I think he's in the position, it's been pretty clear that Trump demands loyalty of his team.
Until such time as when? I mean, when things are breaking up around Donald Trump, as they reportedly are, getting off the boat has got to be a decision about the better of the country rather than the relationship with the president. So, and these guys McMaster's a love of country guy.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
no, I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to push back on the press story by saying, well, these sources weren't leaked, they weren't directly endangered. And my point was just, whatever happened, it clearly was done in a way that may damage one of our relationships with another foreign intelligence service, and that knowledge of information can lead you to a source.
All right, where are we on this? Is this something that's going to be nothing but 4 years of craziness this way, or is some of this behavior going to come back in the impeachment environment?
Well, this is the point I was trying to make earlier. We have some experience in Rhode Island with charismatic leaders who get the support of their followers come hell or high water. We saw that certainly with Buddy Cianci, and we have experience with a senator like Sheldon Whitehouse, who was the prosecutor in that case. And imagine if Buddy Cianci could have fired Sheldon Whitehouse. What you need is a special counsel. You need somebody that's appointed who has to obey the general policies of the Department of Justice, but otherwise they stay out of it and they look into all of these things and they have some credibility to come back to the public and say, this is not about partisanship, this is not about politics, this is what we found out.
Do you think this will make them buckle, the Republican leadership buckle a little bit on an independent prosecutor, this latest stint, real quick?
I think it's in their interest. I think it's in their interest to have that, because they need to be able to point to something to reassure the American people that there is somebody who can look into issues like this that has credibility when the White House clearly doesn't.
All right. By the way, FYI, Bob Correnti was the prosecutor, but your point is well taken on the Planet Own case. Fantastic, Tim. Not so fantastic though.
No.
No. All right. By the way, Hurley signed. We'll tell you about that and what's up next. Danny Hurley signed his deal with URI, not that he was expired. This is a 2-year extension, and that brings him out to 2024. The buyout, I think, is higher, and he got a little bit of a raise. Good stuff. He has taken that program now to a place where it can be nationally prominent, and he can afford to stay. All right. Good news on the local front. See you tomorrow at 3 on WPRO, and back here tomorrow night. Thanks for watching.